Hello, welcome back to On Cloud 9. We're gonna make a cup of coffee on the boat before we do stuff. Dihydrogen oxide. Now we need to boil it.
Enough of that nonsense. We've got an AeroPress, we're gonna make some coffee. Comes with its own little travel mug. We've got a scoopy thing which slides around, and we've got a thingy job doodah stirring. Instructions are on the box. Do 1, 2 and 3, then drink coffee. Simple as. See what happens. Naturally the filters are covered in plastic. Knife, slice. Coffee filters. Base screws off, filter in, twist, click, bang, down. Coffee. Any you like. I'm gonna use my own scoop. Why did I see a new one? Uno. Dos. Tres. Coffee. Hot water. Oh, balance thing on cup. Fill with water. Apparently you give it a stir with this thingy. Stir, 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 stir. Well, there's a bit more water in. Plunger on top. Let it sit for a bit. In a couple of minutes. And then you just plunge. Something about enough pressure, coffee, blah, 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 blah. Cup of coffee. Welcome back to an episode. Oh, that wasn't English. Try again. Welcome back to another episode on Cloud 9. And today we're playing with more wires. This is shot in a little bit of a random sequence. However, the plan is we're going to change over the ignition method. So rather than a key and a barrel, we're going to change it to a pretty cool push button start. So you press the button, the engine starts. And as it says on the panel, for racing use only. So good job, we're going to put it on a 25-foot canal cruiser. But let's have a go. So the first job was to take these screws out of a panel that was in that beautifully cut hole, which is where the old ignition barrel was. I'm sure you've seen it before. And behind that panel we had the standard 10 wire with a 10-pin Yamaha wire thingy plug. So basically that just unplugged from the back of our ignition unit, which had an oil pressure light, the ignition barrel, a key, and initially it did have a kill switch fitted, which I'm going to refit another one and I'll tell you why later. So we unplugged all of that, so the ignition side of our loop was disconnected, and that is what we're going to use when we recrimp the rest of our wires on. Messy boat. Holding all this stuff together, there was that initial faceplate. At the top we had the oil pressure light, we had this little bracket which held the ignition barrel, basically in this panel that we got screwed together. It's not that interesting seeing how that all fits together, but there you go, clips in there, screws back on, blah blah blah. The scariest thing was actually figuring out what all these wires did and being confident enough to actually just start chopping them to pieces. Obviously there is actually a wiring diagram available online for the 10-pin plug, which is what we based this on. I say we, I needed my dad to help me because he does electrics and stuff. But what we found out was basically the red was our positive wire. Brown was kind of the closed end of our loop, the negative as you will. And the black wire, which splits into about 100 different variations, was our ground. Can't remember what the yellow one did. Didn't need it in the end. Wasn't for my engine. Then the white wire was one half of our kill switch, but where these two were connected here, they were terminated, so the kill switch wasn't fitted on the boat initially. I can understand why, it's a large displacement vessel. And then there was still other wires, like this green one that wasn't connected to anything. And then we also found, or I also found, that what went into the back of the plug didn't quite match the back of the connector. There was pink wires, there was red and yellow wires and all sorts, which didn't match any of these. And then it was trying to match up using the wiring diagram and multi-beeper thing, figuring out what all the wires did. And then it was just a simple case, I say simple, it turned out to be simple, I didn't think it was going to be, of matching that back up to our switch panel. The panel we switched it to, like I said, is a push to start button. So the first job was figuring out actually how was to loop all these together. This light in the middle, not sure what it was really for or it's intended for, but it's now my oil pressure light. So unlike the traditional barrel system where it had 3 positions, I had off, turned it into its middle position, which wouldn't start the engine, but kind of that fed power to the system or closed the circuit. And then you turned it to a spring bouncy thing, which started the ignition. So what we've done, this switch here acts as our isolator. So that lifts up, that powers the circuit, which then basically means for us to close the loop and start the engine, you simply press the button. It is an electric start engine. So what happens is you press that button, solenoid comes out, start a motor, engine works. So now it's a simple matter of basically putting a loop of wire across from the flicky switch to the pushy switch to then close our circuit, find where the ground is, find where everything else is on the back of our circuit board here, so that we can match that up to the other end of this ignition barrel, or actually match it up to the switch here. To do all the joints, I thought it would be easiest just to use little ferrules and butt connectors. For £20 you get a little ratchet tool on the eBay, and you've got little kind of butt connectors or terminals, a lot of plugs, and in this other kit we have a load of other different ferrule fittings. So we've got loops there, we've got some butt connectors, and the handiest ones I found as well in this cheap Chinese kit, or whichever Asian country it's from, with these little spade end type things for connecting wires to the battery. Part of the fun of wiring it up was figuring out actually which parts of which connection needed to work, and actually would the switches work in the same desired order that they should do from the standard fit ignition barrel. So I had to buy one of these beepy things. It's called a multimeter. Didn't have a clue how to use one. Again, Dad showed me. But what you can do, you can turn it into the beep setting, which I believe the battery in here basically just turns these 2 prongy whatsits into your positive and negative. You put that across something, if the connections joint when they touch, goes beep. So I tested my kill switch just to make sure this was correct. So the one end of our kill switch we put a terminal at, the other end of our kill switch you place against, and it doesn't beep. That is because my kill switch is currently open. So the way this clever device works is when this lanyard here, or the kill cord, is pulled off, that closes the circuit and actually shorts out 2 wires, which stops the engine from working. So for it to operate, this needs to be on to keep the switch open, which means the wires don't short. However, if I now remove the kill cord, essentially this button is now pressed, and I press these against my 2 terminals. So we had the yellow, the connector here was our ground, and then we had our live there. It now goes beep. Therefore, we know that this switch is working. So for me to start the engine, obviously that switch clip needs to be on. One problem I found was some of the wires supplied were pretty crap, if I'm honest. The cable inside snapped really easily, and they weren't actually chunky enough to crimp into the connectors. So having a bit of a problem there. Okay, problem kind of solved. Some of these ferrules actually didn't come with this crimp, so the colours are a little bit of a different size. Not the end of the world. What I found worked was actually just using the next size down on the crimp tool, kind of holds it in place a little bit better. Insert cable, won't go any further, and squeeze. Squeeze. There we go, finally 2 connectors on the opposite ends of the wires. So what we have on the back of our switch panel then is, like I said, we had our terminal here with our flicky switcher. This is kind of our isolator switch here. What we need to do, we need to put a loop of wire from the push button on this side and loop it to the top there. Doesn't matter which way is positive or negative here. However, the important thing is the ground tab there. We have plenty of ground wires to plug into that. What we also have is our positive, negative, or our in and our out for our switch on this side. And then we had our oil pressure switch, which was quite simple. One of these was a ground cable, and one of these had to go off and just be connected to the oil pressure light cable that we had coming out the back of our switch. So what we had to do was create those loops. So we made the loops of wire, I've labelled them, ignition switch, where it loops from, we've put the connectors on both ends. So our first one went from the top of our cable there, and then we inserted that into that top loop of the switch, and then we screw it down to fasten it. Got two solid connections there. The next one, I completed that basically for the whole back of the plug. I didn't think you'd want to watch me do that. So what we have here is our ground. So that's got three wires going to that ferrule or that connector. The two blacks, one that goes off to the kill switch, one that is the ground for the whole system, and then the ground for our oil pressure light. So the green cable, we're going to join out of the butt connector. The ground was that little pin on the bottom of the switch there. So we're going to plug that in. That means that we've just got to connect the rest together. Like we said, the brown cable from the back of the plug was kind of our closed loop or our negative terminal. So that plugs onto the opposite side of our ignition switch. So just like the other side, push that in with that little spade and connector, tighten it down, nice and easy. The next one we had was this blue and white one here. I labelled that as my kill switch. So we find the matching cable on the kill switch, we plug them together. Next one, again, don't know what this random green cable's for, it's there now. Battery negatives connected. Oh, oil pressure, that was, that turned actually into a red and yellow or a pink and yellow cable. I believe that was actually meant to be a pink cable that was on the switch or the wiring diagram, which we didn't have. The connector or terminal connector on that already fits the butt connectors, so that just pushes in there. And that means that all we've got left to do is, just need to put a crimp on the end of this battery one, or a positive, or in, and then you should be ready to go. So why did I need a kill switch? When we look at our circuit, we think about it again. This is our isolated switch. Turning that on puts power into the circuit. This button, all it ever does is now start our engine. So like we said, that pushes the solenoid up, start motor, hits the flywheel, boom, starts, engine works. What I didn't have was any way of stopping the engine, because the ignition barrel itself does that all when you turn it off. So I needed a kill switch. The kill switch, like we said before, is very smart. It is currently open, so electricity or the two wires connected to it aren't shorted out to stop the engine. The switch is open. To close the switch, first option was to pull the kill cord off. These are designed when you're using power vessels, so boats with engines or personal watercraft like jet skis. You wear these. If you fall off or you need to stop the engine quickly, you pull this cord off. This end should be attached to your body. So if you're out the boat, that boat is not under control. If it kicks over to one side, you are mincemeat in the water, or your boat's just driving off and you're not getting it back. The second way these work is with the clip attached, the button itself actually just can be pressed. That does the same. That shorts the engine, it shorts the connection and stops your engine. So for me now, because I've got a really cool, fancy, awesome looking push button start, press my button and my engine stops. So it's moon shadow. Sorry, there's been a boat I've been following up down the canal and it's now leaving me now. Hi moon shadow. But yeah, that's why I need a kill switch. It is now time for me to be brave enough to test my engine. So like we said, we kept these two plugs together. So it should be a simple case. They have keyways cut in. They're kept together. My battery also has a separate isolated switch. I've just turned that on. So there is power now going from the battery to this cable. So that means that as I lift this switch and turn it on, the light comes on. So that means there's now power in my circuit, which leaves me just to press this button. Okay, the engine works. So as we see, I press my button, solenoid there, starter motor, clicks up, turns that flywheel. Are we ready? There we go. It's turning over, I reckon, or what I haven't done is I haven't prived the bulb. So I know there's power, I know the engine will start. It sounds to me like there's not enough fuel. and it's probably because I haven't actually squeezed the primer bulb to make sure there's fuel in the system. So I'm going to go and do that now, and then we're going to get my engine started. I can see there's a little bit of fuel sticking up there. Still powering the system. There we go. So my engine is fitted with an auto choke, so that's why it's revving quite high now. After a minute or so, it starts to run itself down. So that's the auto choke sorting itself out, and then eventually the engine goes a lot quieter and revs a lot slower. You can now hear the engine slowly starting to wind itself down. That is the auto choke doing its job, and eventually the engine will just tick over nice and smoothly, nice and quietly. Sometimes it cuts out. There we go. Now, time to test that it stops. So we can still see there's lights on. That light's on, saying that we've got no high oil pressure. That light still says we've got power in the circuit. You turn that off, then you doesn't stop, see? That was the problem. Here's our kill switch. As I press this button, the engine should stop. Are you ready? Just like that. So now the job is obviously trying to get this kind of wedged into the hole, but it is too small, or the hole's too small. There we go. Snazzo. And in the process, only 3 wires popped off, so we'll see what happens. Time to reconnect them all. Yay! Lovely jubbly. Last thing to do then is put the kill switch through here, but I need a drill and a drill bit for that, so I haven't got a cordless drill. Hang on. Boom, power, start. Every time. Every time. Stop. Oh, pay up. Last thing then, last mouthful of coffee. I might make another one actually. Yeah, another coffee, tidy up. Oh, I'm filming myself apparently.